CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 2, Part 3, Audio by Renee Matthew. What was so special about the Roman Empire, and why people were so particular in expanding their empires all over the place? Now, people began to understand the importance of expanding empire and also carrying out trade and commerce. And now what was the importance of the Roman Empire and why it expanded? Why it is known as the Great Roman Empire? The answers to all these questions will be found in the next few sessions. The Roman Empire covered a vast stretch of territory that included most of Europe, and that was their capability to stretch and capsize most part of Europe, which is a large part of the Fertile Crescent and North Africa. This particular session will deal with three parts. One thing is the way the empire was organized, the political forces that shaped the destiny of this empire, social groups in which people were divided. These three parts will shape this particular chapter. What was so special about the Roman Empire? It embraced a wealth of local culture and language. It was an intermixture of local culture and many languages. The women were also encouraged to a great extent, and they had stronger legal position. They represented the government in a legal way more than any other place. And they had so much of consolidated power also in Rome. They gave space to women. And much of the economy was run on slave labor. They promoted slave labour, and they denied freedom to many number of people. They wanted consolidated power under one particular person, and power was not divided amongst many number of people. From the 5th century, the empire fell apart, especially in the west. We saw that the Eastern Empire was still prolonging and was more stronger than the western part. But they remained intact and exceptionally prosperous in the eastern half. Now all these aspects will be covered in this particular session. Let's see what is going to happen next. How do we know so much about the Roman Empire? Because we have a lot of resources which takes us to the early life of the Roman Empire, how it was conquered and how were they so prosperous. And the three main important resources that lead us to the early part of the Roman Empire are the texts, the documents and material remains which the archaeologists have thrived on. They excavated from the undergrounds. These are the three sources to which the present world has got an access and which tells a lot about the Roman Empire. Now, textual sources, what are they? They include histories of the period that were written by contemporaries, that is, by many people it was written, the textual sources, and these sources were known as annals because the narrator was constructed annually. Every year it was updated, and annal means year, annual. Letters, speeches, sermons, laws, and many things gave an access to what happened in the early days of the Roman Empire, because we get to know about the culture, the way people taught, the way people wrote, and all these things. We had an access to all these things through letters, speeches, sermons, and laws. Documentary resources include inscriptions and papyri. What all inscriptions were there, the papyri and everything was actually accumulated. They collected and gathered everything from different parts of the world. So you should understand that it was a great work for the archaeologists team. It was not something very simple. There has to be a lot of coordination and unity when you have to gather all these things and put it under one particular roof. And inscriptions were usually cut on stone. So a large number survive because stone's not very easy to demolish the ones that is inscripted on the stone, especially in both Greek and Latin. So something which has got its base on the stone will not just get damaged very soon. The papyrus. You must have heard about the Egyptian papyrus. Now before we go into the medium of writing, let's see what the papyrus is. It was a reed-like plant that grew along the banks of River Nile in Egypt. It was processed to produce a writing material that was very widely used in everyday life. So papyrus is the base of writing for the whole world. Thousands of contracts, letters, accounts, many documents survive on papyrus. We have the remains of it, and some are really in good condition also. Those were published by scholars, and these scholars who were very skilled in writing on the papyrus or conserving the papyrus were known as papyrologists. Very important term, papyrus and papyrologists. Now the material remains that has come to us today through the archaeologist has got a wide assortment, different varieties are there. So it took some time for the archaeologist to segregate it and understand the base of each material or document. So for example, through excavation and field survey, it is through these two techniques that they understood the different assortment of these resources. For example, buildings, monuments and other kinds of structures had pottery, coins, mosaics and even entire landscape, but everything cannot be studied in one day. So when you get a piece of pottery, it will have to be segregated under pottery. Mosaic means it is art. So they will have to do a lot of segregation to go deep into it. If it is landscape, they will have to they have to carry on other strategies to understand the topography and what was there, how did they live and everything. It was an access to so much of their culture and their living. For example, aerial photography. They used to capture photos from the sky. So all this technology was also helping them. Now each of these resources, you should understand that every resource that is collected or gathered is very important for us to know about the past. And they combine to form a fruitful exercise. And it is based on the historian's skill. The historians, the archaeologists, the excavators, it's a huge team. You cannot go for an expedition just with the archaeologists. You need to have a lot of people from different facets of knowledge. So it is the skill which decides on how you excavate and how you understand the importance of each resource and share it across the world. The two powerful empires which ruled over Europe, North Africa and the Middle East. Very important part of the textbook. We are coming very close to it. So, the powerful empires which ruled most of Europe, North Africa and Middle East in the period between the birth of Christ and the early part of the 7th century, say down to the 630s. We are going to introduce two empires which ruled between this huge period, between the birth of Christ and the early part of the 17th century, down to the 630s. Which were the two empires? Roman Empire and the Iranian Empire. Iranian Empire was a part of the Persian Empire. The Romans and Iranians were rivals. They fought with each other. Because when they have the potential to gain power over the whole world, they will fight with each other. Smaller kingdoms and smaller territories were also there, but they never dared to fight with these big empires. But these both were fighting for proving which is the greater power. And their fights are very famous across the world history. Now, one particular reason for their fight is they were very next to each other. They lay next to each other, and they were only separated by a narrow strip of land that ran along the river Euphrates. Can you see the river Euphrates somewhere? Very important for us because it formed our Mesopotamia. It was a great resource for the Mesopotamians also. So Euphrates River, it was on either side of the Euphrates River. And that is why it was very important. Can you see the Euphrates River here? On one side you had the Romans and the other side you had the Iranians, the Persian Empire. So that is why the great conflict began. Now in this chapter, we shall be looking at the Roman Empire. But we will also take a look at the Iranians because they were great rivals. And who dominated, who were successful in the rivalry. All these things can be seen. So this is the Roman Empire and this is the Persian Empire. And of course, Iran is a part of the Persian Empire, but Iranians were really dominating and very, very, very powerful. If you look at the map, you can see that continents of Europe, Africa, they are separated by a sea. Okay? These two continents are separated by a sea that stretches all the way from Spain in the west to Syria in the east. So that is the only separation that they had. And this particular sea was the Mediterranean Sea. And it was the heart of Rome's empire. And we saw even with the Mesopotamians and all the others that Mediterranean Sea was a great resource for people to carry on trade. Without this particular sea, without the blessing of the sea, they wouldn't have carried on trade and commerce. But who was the heartthrob of Rome? It was Mediterranean Sea, and the greatest binding factor was the Mediterranean Sea, and the division was between the two continents, Europe and Africa. It is very important for you to know the geography of the places, because otherwise you will not be able to remember all the facts. For example, you should have taken a look at the two empires, which is very important, their location, so that when you are writing your answers, you will have a visual access to what you're going to write. Rome dominated the Mediterranean and all the regions around it, not only Mediterranean, all the other regions also. It had a strong power. It had a strong influence on all the other regions, both north as well as south, not just one particular place. To the north, the boundaries of the empire were formed by two great rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. Okay, to the south, by the huge expanse of the desert called Sahara. So take a look at the map of the Roman Empire. You will see that Danube, you have the river Rhine and Danube, that was in the northern part, and in the southern part you have the Sahara desert. That is how it stretched, the great stretch from north to south, Sahara and the rivers. Okay, so that was the influence of the Roman Empire. Now, the vast stretch of territory was the Roman Empire, that is from Rhine and Danube to Sahara Desert. That was the great stretch, and that was so important about the Roman Empire. Iran controlled the whole area south of the Caspian Sea, that is this particular part. Especially this particular part was controlled by the Iranians, down to Eastern Arabia, this part, and sometimes large parts of Afghanistan as well. So that was the part which was controlled by the Iranians down of the Caspian Sea. Now these two superpowers had divided up most of the world, because they had actually taken up most part of the world. It is not that they gave chance for any other small kingdom to actually come up. Okay, and it was described by the Chinese as Tachin. So it means greater chin. That is, greater chin of the world was dominated and it was taken over by the Romans and Iranians, roughly the West. The early empire. Now let's take a look at how the Romans came and how they emerged as the superpower. The Roman Empire it can be broadly classified into two phases, that is the early phase and the late phase. And this early phase and late phase is divided just by one particular break. And what is the break? The 3rd century. As a sort of historical watershed between them. So between them, this is the only break, the early phase and the late phase. In other words, the whole period down to the main part of the 3rd century can be called the early empire. That is this particular part, down to the 3rd century. And the later was known as the late empire. I hope this point is very clear to you. The break was only done by the 3rd century.